Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about Contesting the Body of Christ by Myles Wertnz. This was published this year, a few months ago, by Baker Academic. I want to say thank you to Baker for sending me a copy of this for review. As usual, this is my honest response to the book. I'm going to talk you through my format of kind of covering the main idea, summarizing the main idea. I'm going to focus a little bit more on the research behind this one, then the readability of its style, and then just my reactions at the end. Before I dive into that, though, I just want to highlight that my Patreon book club, monthly book club, as I record this, we are reading Michael Bird's 7 Things I Wish Christians Knew About the Bible, and then going to discuss it together. So if you're interested in participating in a book club like that, or just getting my monthly newsletter about what I'm reading, etc., check out the Patreon link. But let's jump into the book review. So Myles Wertnz is someone that I have appreciated for several years. I've not read any books by him, but I've read some online articles and essays that he's put out there, and I've found him to be super thoughtful and very kind of aware of the global church, is the way that I've kind of received him. I've seen him to be very sensitive and kind of cautious, like interpreter and theologian that takes into his own perspective a really diverse array of theologies and kind of global expressions of the church. And I just appreciated that very much about him, and so I was really intrigued by this title being explicitly about ecclesiology, or the doctrine of the church, and particularly about the recent century and what that's meant for the development of the church around the globe. So I just felt like he was going to be a good person positioned to write about that, so that's why I was really intrigued by this title, and was looking forward to reviewing it. So what this book is, it does need to be framed a little bit, because I was expecting one thing and got something else. So it presents itself as a history. The subtitle is Ecclesiology's Revolutionary Century. So I thought it would be about kind of a chronological history of like the 1900s, the 20th century, and kind of the proliferation of different traditions of the church around the world. And it is historical, but it is definitely not a chronological or narrative history about the church. It's not even just a straightforward theology or a straightforward ecclesiology of the church. It's kind of a combination or synthesis of all the above. And what he does is, and so the prospective reader of this book should know, kind of how it's structured. He actually takes the phrase from the Nicene Creed, the 4 marks, one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic, and he does sort of a combination of historical and theological reflection on the identity of the church through those 4 marks, through the lenses of those 4 marks. So it's a thematic study, not just strictly chronological. And so he discusses each mark. What does it mean for the church to be one? What does it mean for the church to be apostolic, etc.? And then looks with a historical lens on how that has kind of played out in the 20th century largely. And then what does that then mean for people to, how can people understand what the church is, the church's identity, the church's mission, so on and so forth, with this kind of multi-layered, kind of complex thematic approach. So he goes through those 4 marks. Each mark he dips into really interesting historical data that's very global in scope, and brings that to bear on a more careful, cautious, sensitive, complex, nuanced understanding of the identity of the body of Christ in the world today. So that's what Contesting the Body of Christ is. And the research on this is, in terms of my subcategories that I review, the research on this is just off the charts good. It's the strongest aspect of the book, in my opinion. What I said about the author a minute ago is true. He understands the global church very well. He brings in, if you're reading this as an American or broadly a Westerner, he's going to bring in lots of things that push on and kind of complicate your understanding of the church. He certainly brings in Catholic examples and theologians. He brings in Global South. He brings in Eastern traditions. There are lots of one very specific example of what he brings in is talking about the effect of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki on the Catholic population in Japan, which is something I had no clue about before I read this book. But the Catholic population in Japan was just devastated by the bombing, and that's just one example of kind of a historical data point he brings into the discussion through these chapters to stretch and push the depth and robustness of our understanding of the identity of the church in the globe. And so I was just impressed over and over and over by these anecdotes and data points he brings in, especially to someone like me who is so thoroughly westernized in how I understand, my position in terms of understanding history and certainly the church. It's really a welcome challenge to that perspective. So if that's what you're looking for, then the research he brings to bear on this is just extraordinarily good. Quickly, the readability of this is... It is not a hard book to read, but it is a bit of a slower read. It's a bit of a denser read. It's not long at all. It's less than 200 pages, but it is dense. He does move through a pretty high caliber of research. And also, this actually surprised me a little bit on the readability, the theological, somewhat philosophical territory he gets into when he reflects on, for example, the chapter on the Catholicity of the Church. He goes into great depth at unpacking and peeling apart what that term means, and particularly how in the world do you distinguish that from the unity or the oneness of the church, which is a separate of the four marks. And so he goes to great pains to carefully and precisely define each of these four marks and reflect theologically, somewhat philosophically on them, as he then threads in this historical data that I already talked about. So all that to say, the readability slows a bit. It's on the denser, more academic side. So just know that if you're getting into it, and if you see it and you think, oh, this is just a breezy short little paperback, it's not. It's a bit slower to get through, but it's very careful, and the acumen is very high. So take that for what it's worth. For the more academic readers, I think that you'll be right at home getting through it. Finally, my reactions. So this book, as I said before, this book was not what I expected it to be, because I was expecting a bit more of a straightforward historical, chronological presentation. But I quite appreciated it. And I will be keeping it as a reference tool, not as a pull off the shelf to read cover to cover again, but definitely as a reference tool. And actually, funnily enough, as I record this review, I am preaching on the Doctrine of the Church literally the same week, and so this is a book that I've been using in that teaching prep because of what he brings to bear on the careful precision of defining each of these four marks and the historical data he brings and the way he stretches it. And so I appreciate this very much. I think it's a really helpful, pretty unique book on combining history and ecclesiology and theological reflection in this kind of creative, somewhat unique structure using the time-tested method or phrasing of the Nicene Creed, bringing to bear on that. I think he combines all that stuff in a really, really unique and thoughtful way. And the last thing I'll say about it is that I also found he's coming at this from a Protestant perspective. So I think how that equips him is to have a kind of a broad, universalistic, and encompassing view on who the church is in the world, because he is not trying to defend a particular tradition or set up boundary markers around a particular tradition. He's more so trying to present diversity of the church as it exists throughout the world. And I appreciated that expansiveness. I appreciated that open-endedness. I appreciated that inclusiveness that he brings to bear, which really, really supports his research efforts very well. So really appreciate this book. Hard to know if I give it a flat recommendation to anybody, but if you're interested in a bit of a deeper dive, actually, as I'm thinking about this, I just posted my review of Carmen Imes's book, Becoming God's Family, and one of my comments on that book was that it was a bit intro level. This is building off of that in a way that is not at all intro level, but might give you the meat, the serious rigor, and certainly the amazing historical research that would go maybe a deeper level than what that book did. So if that's what you're looking for, then high recommendation for this, but I wouldn't give this to someone who hasn't really read much on ecclesiology or isn't even that interested in that particular kind of the philosophical contours of even that question. So really appreciate this one. Glad to review it, and I hope that this was helpful to you. As always, thanks for taking a few minutes to watch.